Okay, so we shall continue here with a bit more on Judaism. And right now, I'm just looking at going over some of the Jewish holy days. Okay, so it all begins, and first of all, I need to point out that in Judaism, they follow a lunar calendar, not a solar-based calendar the way we do in the West, the Gregorian calendar. But it's based on, in Judaism and Islam as well, they both have lunar calendars where a month is is determined according to the moon cycle. And so then it doesn't correlate with the Western calendar. So I can't give you specific dates, okay, according to our Gregorian calendar. So just, so it begins, the Jewish New Year begins in September, okay, in the fall. Excuse me, is where things begin as far as Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And it marks the beginning of what's often called the High Holy Days. Very important period in the Jewish calendar, the most important period in the Jewish calendar. So it begins with Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, which begins a 10-day period of penitence, okay, seeking repentance before God. And how it begins is with the blowing of the ram's horn. Okay, it's like a ram's horn is blown. And that marks the beginning of this 10-day period. So sacredness, holiness is marked in time. Okay, in the passage of time, just like the Sabbath begins on Friday night at sunset, dusk, when the sun has set, and the Sabbath, the day of rest, continues on until Saturday when the sun sets again. And so it also, the day begins at night, what we think of as nighttime. The day begins after sunset. That marks the beginning of a new day. Anyways, so we have the blowing of the ram's horn to mark this 10-day period. And so it celebrates creation. It's a new year. So it celebrates the creation of the universe and the beginning of all things new. And just like in so many New Year traditions, this is when you basically take stock of your life, what you want to change, where you've fallen short, what you want to intend for the new year. You know how we make New Year rituals, right? And it's a time of spiritual renewal that is really appropriate with creation. When things are created, things are brought back into newness. And so you're starting a new cycle, a new year of life. And so you want to clear out the old, that which is worn out, that which is dark, disappointments, all the negatives. You want to get rid of them and kind of do a bit of a cleansing, right? And this is very common with New Year rituals. So this is what this is about here. It celebrates the beginning of a new year, it celebrates the creation of the universe by God, and therefore it also marks the beginning of a time of spiritual reflection and renewal. And so it culminates on the 10th day, this 10-day period. The 10th day is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And that kind of brings this period kind of to completion. And on Yom Kippur, if you remember, we talked about it, how the high priest during this time, and only during this time, would enter into the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, where there'd be the blood of an animal that would be sprinkled on the Ark of the Covenant. And it was this day where there would be the sins of Israel, of all the people of Israel, would be forgiven on this day, right? That's very important. So the Day of Atonement, the forgiveness of sins. So since there's no longer a temple, right, and you can't do these rituals, this gets adapted to a special synagogue in the service, and you would spend the day fasting, not eating, and spending that time, the whole day, in prayerful meditation and reflection in your life and seeking forgiveness from God. Okay, so that's Yom Kippur. And so it closes the day, this 10-day period, with again the blowing of the ram's horn, the shofar. Okay, S-H-O-F-A-R. I should have put that in there. So that is blown to close this 10-day period. And then, excuse me, my voice. Hang on here. Let me just pause for a sec. So then a few days after Yom Kippur, we have Sukkot. This is known as the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles. And so what that term refers to, booths or tabernacles, are sort of like temporary housing, sort of like tents, basically. You can think of it as like, going camping and setting up a tent, but it's sort of like a lean-to or whatever, if you would, out in the forest. And these are sort of temporary housing that was built when after they left, after the Exodus event, and they were in the Sinai Peninsula in the period of the wilderness, where they were just, constantly kind of on the move at this time, not having any permanent home base. And so they had temporary kind of lean-to shelters, if you like, that they would create, that they would move and travel around in. So that's what this refers to, as that time that they then would remember, this period where they were not in the promised land of Canaan, but yet they had left Egypt. They were in sort of this in-between zone of the wilderness, and how God provided for them with food and protection and took care of them during this time. So this then is, of course, in the fall, and where people then would often, maybe on their back deck or in the backyard, build a type of temporary covering of some kind. And they would, for about a week, they'll have special festivities of meals out there, reciting the stories, reciting from the scriptures, having these special meals and gatherings to remember this time in their history. Okay. And that's what we'll see, is a lot of these holy days are tied in with the history of the Jewish people. So then going from there, later on, we have Hanukkah, which usually takes place in December. And it's known as a Festival of Lights. And I already mentioned this. This is to remember and celebrate the victory of the Maccabean revolt. And this is where you have the lighting of the special candlestick with 8 candles on there. One is lit each day, to remember that miracle of how the fire kept burning while they were under siege and didn't have enough oil and wouldn't be able to get any for 8 days, that it kept burning during this time. And so it remembers this kind of miracle as associated with the lighting the candles and remembering the victory and celebrating the victory at the time of the Maccabean revolt. Well, then we come to, moving along here, usually around February or so, is Purim. It's sort of a Mardi Gras-like type of festivity. And this is tied in with one of the books in the Bible that talks about Queen Esther. She was given in marriage to the Persian king at the time when the Persians were ruling. And she found out that there were some people who were plotting to destroy a Jewish community. And she approached the king with this, and anyways, through her efforts, that managed to save the lives of these Jewish people, that it didn't happen, this kind of slaughter that was in the works, in the plan. So this gets celebrated where people will dress up in costumes and give out candy and kind of dance and party and just have a celebration. Okay, it's known as Purim. And then moving further along, coming into March or maybe early April, we have the Jewish Passover. And this is to celebrate the whole Exodus event, their redemption from slavery in Egypt, the coming of the 10 plagues. And again, remember the angel of death that passed over the house that had the blood of the lamb smeared on the doorpost. Okay, that's where we get the name from. Right? And they were to eat that lamb, eat a meal of roasted lamb. And that then developed into what's known as a Seder supper, this special meal that they would have during the Passover, where as they have this meal with various symbolic elements involved, of course, it's always with lamb and other things, that they would tell the story of how God saved them from the Egyptians, the slavery, and how he sent the 10 plagues and how they were delivered from that. So they would kind of retell the story and have this special meal. And this is what, in terms of Christianity later on, Easter, the Christian Easter is always very much tied in with the time of the Jewish Passover. And in case you've ever wondered, maybe you haven't, why there is no permanent fixed date for Easter, is because Easter, which revolves around the crucifixion of Jesus on Good Friday, right? And then the resurrection on Easter Sunday, that is tied in with Jesus' Last Supper, when he was having the Passover meal with his disciples and then was given over to the authorities that led to his crucifixion on Friday, right? And so that's why Easter always depends upon when the Jewish Passover falls, and Easter can vary from year to year. It's always sometime, the end of March, early April there, right? Then that's followed by Shavuot. which means the Feast of First Fruits. And this is something that is very ancient, where people were to bring the first fruits, i.e. the first tenth of the crops that were brought in, the first tenth of the calves that were born, or the lambs that were born. They were to bring in the tithe, the first tenth of whatever they got from the land, all right, in the spring, as an offering to God at the temple. And is to remember then that everything fundamentally comes from God, and you always honor that, respect that, by giving 1/10, the first tenth of whatever is brought to you from the growth of the land, back over to the temple and to God as an offering. And so people used to go to Jerusalem, go on a major pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bring their first fruits there. Well, since it got destroyed, that has become a celebration in the synagogue of the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay. And then later on, the Pentecost event in Christianity is going to be tied in with that. And we'll talk about that when we get to Christianity. But just so you know, the Pentecost depends on when the Jewish Shavuot takes place. Okay. All right. Then the last one is in the summer, where it's the 9th of Av. And this is a day spent in mourning and fasting, where people would fast and remember and mourn the destruction of the temple, along with all the Jewish lives that have been lost throughout history. Jews have been martyred, put to death for their faith, for being Jews. And so this is a day of mourning. And so people in Jerusalem, excuse me, they then would go to the temple there, and there's one wall that's still remaining, the western wall, right? Most of the temple, it's all sort of destroyed, and there's now a mosque that's built there. So that's why they can't rebuild the temple, because there's a mosque built on top of that Temple Mount, on that space. But there's one wall that's still remaining. It's called the Western Wall, and it's also gotten the name of the Wailing Wall. Wailing Wall, and it says people would go there and wail, cry, weep, and mourn the destruction of the temple. That's where it got its name from. Okay. Excuse me. Well, then, in this terms of this section here, I just want to end with 13 articles of faith that were put together by Moses Maimonides. And he's a very important Jewish thinker, philosopher, theologian, jurist, intellectual, died in the year 1204. But Judaism as a religion, is more about the history of the Jewish people, as I've mentioned many times, right? And so what he did is, since there was Christianity, there's Islam, there's other religions, they all have kind of doctrines of faith that they put together. He decided to kind of compile what he saw as the essence of the Jewish faith. And that these are the fundamental kind of 13 articles of faith that he held all Jews should believe in. To be Jewish, you would believe in these 13 things. And I didn't put a number to each. Okay, but each one is before comma, each one is a point, basically. And so this then, and I'll just go through these with you, but these then got turned into a hymn in a very poetic form, and I'm not going to read it to you, but it becomes a hymn that is regularly sung in synagogues in their services, where they would sing out these various articles of faith here. Okay, and so this is basically a bit of a summary of the Jewish faith and what's believed. And so it's first this, that all Jews are to believe, number one, in God's existence, that God exists. There is a God. Number two, there's only one God, his unity, the oneness of God, monotheism. Thirdly, his incorporeality, that is, that God does not have a physical body. Okay, he's not in material form. He is incorporeal. Therefore, no form, no image can be made of this God. Okay, that's number three. Number four, his eternity. The God is eternal, has no beginning, no end. He is the creator of all, but he's never been created. He's eternal, has always existed. Okay. Number five, the Jews' obligation to worship him alone and not to worship any other God, that you worship him alone. Right. Then number six is to believe in prophecy. That God is able to speak to human beings and bring forth the messages, revelations from God, okay, to believe in the phenomena of prophecy. That's number five, right? Number six is that Moses is the greatest of all prophets, okay, the greatest of all the prophets. Number 7 is the divine origin of the Torah, that the revelation given at Mount Sinai, it came from God. It's of divine origin. It's not a human creation. It does not represent human philosophy, right? It's of God. It's divine. Then, and I now forget what number I'm on. But anyways, the next one is the eternal validity of the Torah. Since the Torah is from God, is of divine origin, it is eternally valid. Okay, it's absolute, right? It's absolute. Next is that God's knowledge of human deeds. God knows if you've been naughty or nice. God has full knowledge of all human deeds, right? Next, God will punish evil and reward good. Okay, he is a God of justice, right? There will be punishment of evil and the rewarding of good. Then next, to believe in God's promise, that he promised that he will send a Messiah, and Messiah will come, right? And then last, it's his promise, God's promise to resurrect the dead. There will be a resurrection of the dead, okay? So these are the 13 articles of faith that are meant to basically sum up the Jewish belief system in a sense, okay? All right, and I think, whoops, oh here, let me just kind of go through this here. Now here, this is a bit of a timeline. Let me move this out of the way. I don't know if it makes a difference here to move this down here. Yeah, so this is for you to look at and to note here. This kind of puts things down in a bit of a historical time frame, all the different books of the Bible, okay? What's often called the Jewish Bible goes beginning with Genesis is the first key book. It's a large book and has a lot of stories about the creation of the world, the stories of Noah and the flood and various things. But then also gives us the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and how things all happened there, the Exodus event, Moses, the revelation at Mount Sinai. And that's where we come into Exodus, and then Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Leviticus. They give us a lot of the laws, a lot of the covenant that gets established through Moses at Mount Sinai. And so Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Leviticus, those 5 books are often called the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. Sometimes also they're also referred to as the Torah, the written Torah. Okay, those 5 books. Then we have the period of Judges. Remember Joshua, as you can see down below, he's the one that leads them into the land of Canaan. And then we have the period of Judges. And so there are books named, like, again, there's all kinds of books here, Job, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, but this is where you can kind of see the different books where they fall in play here. And don't worry about it too much, but this is just here for, I don't know, give you a bit of a time flow of things. So you've got the book of Judges here that tells us about Samuel, and you got 1st and 2nd Samuel. Remember the Samuel who was a judge and then also a prophet who then appoints the first king Saul, right? And then you got the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings goes through all the different kings of Israel. And then 1st and 2nd Chronicles also has some of the history of this whole time period, going through that history. Then you'll have, again, the books of Solomon, like the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Songs. Those are sort of basically attributed to Solomon, right? And then you have various prophets throughout here, all kinds of prophets, and Joel, Amos, Hosea, Jeremiah, like all kinds of various prophetic books. And then some of these books are just known as writings, like the book of Esther. Esther wasn't a prophet. She was the queen that was married to the Persian king, right? And the story of there. Then we have the story of that Babylonian exile where they returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. There you've got the books of Ezra and Nehemiah that describe all of that. All right. So you can kind of get a bit of a sense here, all the different books in the timeline, the period. Then in here to the right more, now that's now referring to the Christian Bible, then what they call the New Testament, the period of Jesus there with the Gospels, the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the book of Acts, and then the other books that make up the New Testament that become a part of the Christian Bible, right? And they're all there in that 1st century when they were written. So this is just a bit of a flow. You can see here, the nation of Israel, how it's split north and south at the very bottom, how they're in exile. And then the Israel's always kind of under rule in some way or another in that timeline. So it's just a bit of an overview of the Bible here. Okay. All right. So I think that's it here for today on this one.